Once again, the Hammond Library was the scene for another great program in Black History Month, which sadly now is drawing to a close. Sad in terms of the fact that it was a great lecture. Dr. Kodi Roberts on hand. The biggest crowd you've had so far, in fact.
Yeah, it was a really good audience. A lot of students, which I'm always excited to see as a history professor, as well as library patrons. And so we're really glad to bring a more diverse group of the Hammond population down to the library.
So your talk was really the action portion of the Civil War and its aftermath in terms of actual terrorism in the American homeland, and not just a word you're throwing around.
Right. If you think of terrorism as the deployment of violence in order to achieve political means, the redemptionist movement after the Civil War during Reconstruction absolutely fits into that context. And I think it's difficult, given our modern understanding of terrorism and our unfortunate familiarity with it, not to start to think about the political violence in the South after Reconstruction in that same light.
Give us some examples, because some of the numbers were startling.
Absolutely. Especially by the time you get to the 1870s, you have the federal government sending in federal troops, declaring martial law, governors of states having to call in, again, federal troops in order to put down terrorist activity. People who are determined to take control of the government in those states. Again, one of the stats that we talked about tonight was the fact that when the Reinforcement Acts go into play in the 1870s, the federal government arrests 700 Klan terrorists, that is KKK terrorists, just in Meridian, Mississippi alone. And a lot of the problem with dealing with terrorism after the war is that there are so many people affiliated with these organizations. The federal government doesn't have the resources to prosecute them all. So even if they round them up, even if they catch them, they're frequently forced to free them immediately after.
For example, you talked about Meridian, Mississippi, where there were 30 murders in a weekend.
Absolutely. And here in Louisiana, the Colfax massacre on Red River, where over 100 African Americans are killed in a day. All of that, again, we tend to think of Reconstruction in a black-white binary, but this is politically motivated violence in order to take control of the government. Again, which is, by any modern definition, terrorism.
A United States senator assassinated.
Absolutely. The violence of terrorists is not limited by race. Republicans are a target, whether they be white Republicans or black Republicans. And the killing of a local senator, say in North Carolina, for instance, or South Carolina, pushes folks away from voting for the Republican Party. And it's a tactic that's used over and over again by Klan-style terrorists after the war.
Of course, the political parties have flipped since then, but you talk really about an armed insurrection reversing Republican gains in state after state.
Absolutely. The Republicans do a pretty good job nationally of holding on to power into the 1870s, but the determination of Southern Democrats and their willingness to use the most extreme measures, whether they be rape or murder or kidnapping, against huge swaths of the population, again, black and white, allow them to retake the government in state after state after state during the 1870s.
Lots of parallels to present-day headlines, including the officials in the South today who don't want to follow federal law.
Absolutely. We think of kind of states' rights arguments as having maybe a stopgap, a natural ending point that they won't go past. But if you look at American history, it doesn't really bear that out. If you have folks who are resisting via arms, especially government edicts, you run the risk of falling back into this terrorism. And there's just because folks are involved in politics doesn't exclude them from that. A lot of the terrorists who participated as members of the Klan were also Democratic politicians in the South.
We talk about ISIS or these groups overseas, these terrorist groups, as though they're aliens from another planet. What you outlined was terrorism in America.
Absolutely. The Department of Homeland Security knows very well that there's such a thing as domestic terrorism, but we in the American uh, 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 mainstream tend to think of terrorism post 9/11 as something done by international actors. But in that post Civil War moment, again, the terrorism is very much homegrown and local, and it functions so well because it's the purview of the political majority. It's very akin to what you see in a lot of regions in the Middle East, where you have extremists who arise that are in lockstep, maybe not in terms of their politics or their methods, but in lockstep socially, culturally, with the majority, with the ethnic, racial, religious majorities in the areas where they operate. What you see in the South after the war is much more akin to that.
You know, I'd often say, well, what else do you want to share with us, or where can a person get more information? But obviously, standing here at the library, it's a good segue into the fact that Black History Month never needs to end here.
Absolutely, and it's not just Black history, right? Black history is American history. If you look at Black history, it'll deepen your understanding of the way American politics work overall. And I encourage anybody who's looking at Black politics, looking at Black culture, to expand their understanding, to move outward from there, use it as a starting point, and vice versa. If you're interested in American politics, if you're interested in American culture, look a little bit into Black history. It might make you more aware, more thoughtful about things that you were already interested in.